Hello friends, I am Rajmal Jain from Physical Research Laboratory. Today I will talk on X-ray emission from solar flares. I plan to introduce you the various kind of X-ray emission processes, and then briefly I will introduce the sun and solar flares. There are various mechanisms for the generation of solar flares and what kinds of models are there. I will briefly give a flavor of those solar X-ray emission model for the flares. Then I will talk about the key issues, particularly the issues which were taking lead in the early part of this century, that is between 2000 and 2005. So I will discuss about those key issues, and based on those key issues we designed and developed a spaceborne experiment, namely solar X-ray spectrometer SOX, which was the first spaceborne solar astronomy experiment of India. I will briefly discuss the instrumentation, observations, analysis and results, and then I will conclude my talk. Okay, let us start how really the X-ray emission from the solar flare plasma, or in general from the sun, it looks. We all know that the sun emits radiation which covers the electromagnetic spectrum right from the radio waves to all the way up to gamma rays. Here we have to split up. One, that is radio waves, visible spectrum, extreme ultraviolet, or even the microwave. All those emissions appear as a wave, while this X-ray gamma rays, they are appearing as they are coming to us as photons. In this picture, where x-axis is the energy, y-axis is the intensity, you can see there is a continuous one curve. As a function of energy, it is moving, and in this curve there are some spikes you can see, and I have shown by the red arrows. These spikes, actually you can see, and the whole curve, otherwise it is a continuous curve. So it means from this plot itself we can take impression that there are two types of X-ray emission. One is the line emission, the other is the continuum emission. Let me also first introduce you the energy range of X-ray domain. It actually starts from scientifically from 0.1 keV kilo electron volt to up to 500 kilo electron, and it includes both soft X-ray and hard X-ray regime. What is the soft X-ray and what is the hard X-ray, I will discuss in my talk. Just for the units conversion and for your knowledge, 1 kilo electron volt is 1.602 into 10 to the power minus 16 joule. So this is on the energy scale. If I convert the same thing on frequency scale, that is E equal to h nu, then 2.4 into 10 to the power 17 hertz. And if I change it on the wavelength scale, then the 1 kilo electron volt is equal to 1.2 nanometer, that is 12 angstrom. And the flux generally which we talk, that is how many number of photons are there. So flux is 3 into 10 to the power minus 12 ergs per square centimeter per second over the energy range of 0.22 to 10 keV. And this energy range, that is starting say from 0.1 keV to 10 keV, is definitely we consider as a soft X-ray regime. And generally above, that is about 20 keV, is being considered as hard X-rays. However, the regime between the 10 and 20 keV is actually overlaid by soft X-rays as well as hard X-rays. So it depends on the flare to flare that from where actually the hard X-ray begins and where the soft X-ray ends. Let us see What are the radiation mechanisms of this X-ray line emission and continuum emission? We know that from our school days as well as from our graduate time that when the electron moving very fast and with it interacts or collides with an atom, then the atom basically has the nucleus, and above that there are shells, the orbits. And in the first shell is the K shell, then L shell and M shell, etc. We know the Bohr spectrum. So now the electron actually rejects from the K shell and it produces the X-ray emission, and the ejected electron comes out as a photoelectron. Basically what happens at that location, hole is produced, and the electron above that K shell, that is from the L shell, will jump and it will fill it up. So the difference in energy of the incident electron and the photoelectron which is produced is the energy of the X-ray emission. That is known as the K alpha line emission, which is shown here in the plot over here. You can see very nicely. Sometimes it happens that even from the M shell also the electron jumps and it comes to the K shell, and we can see that that is line another which is produced of the lower energy K beta line. So this is how the lines are produced. Now many times it happens, on the other hand, the electron which is basically accelerated either due to the very high temperature plasma, and it comes with that speed in the atmosphere of the proton, let us say, or any ion, then what will happen, its speed will be slowed down and the electron will have a deviated, its path will be deviated, and X-ray emission will be produced as a result of this kind of journey of the electron. This is known as basically Bremester law, but this is due to the temperature, that is E equal to KT process. So when temperature is very high, the electron will be accelerated also, and it will, but during its interaction with the ambient protons or ion, then it will change its path, and as a result, X-rays will be produced. This is known as continuum emission and thermal Bremester-Long. So continuum emission through the thermal Bremester-Long process. There is yet another process where the electrons are not governed by the temperature, rather they have acceleration or they are governed due to the magnetic field. So when the electrons move under the influence of strong magnetic fields, then it will be accelerated. And it will be actually accelerated, and energy will be governed with the equation E equal to half mv square or mc square. So it means velocity is very high, and it will be rather more and more accelerated under the influence of magnetic field. And during this, it will collide with the ambient plasma and it will produce the continuum emission. This continuum emission is known as non-thermal X-ray Bremester law. So now in the even the continuum, we have two types of emission. One is thermal Bremester law. The other one is non-thermal Bremester law. Thermal Bremester law is governed by the temperature, while in non-thermal it is governed by the velocity, which is influenced by the strong magnetic field. Well, there is another process also, that X-ray produces the X-ray. So primary incident photon, or that is of the low energy, when X-ray photon collides with the electron, then the secondary X-ray emission is produced, which is known as inverse Compton effect, and secondary X-ray emission can be produced. So basically, to now if we conclude the X-ray emission process, then we have two types of emission. We have one is the line emission, the second one is the continuum emission. The line emission, maybe we can divide into the K alpha, K beta, K gamma, like that, and similarly L alpha, L beta, and then continuum we can divide into thermal and non-thermal. All these processes we can see in the solar plasma. So this is the picture of the sun. Friends, you may like to see at the center, which is very bright. So this is known as the core of the sun. And at the core of the sun, the temperature is extremely high, almost 15 million degree K. And as a consequence of such very high temperature, the whole gaseous that gases which are highly pressurized under the high density and high temperature, so they go under thermonuclear fusion reaction. That is, hydrogen is continuously being converted into the helium, and then again helium goes back to hydrogen, etc. But as a result of every reaction of thermonuclear fusion reaction, the gamma ray photons are generated. And those gamma ray photons which are generated over here in the core, they slowly move outside. And during their passage outside, they continuously interact with the another ambient material over there, which is also generally hydrogen atoms, and basically it is protons. So this, during interaction, what will happen? They will lose their energy. So all gamma rays photons will be continuously, during every interaction, they will be keep on losing energy, and finally they will come to the X-ray energy, then they will come to the EUV energy, and then ultraviolet. So this whole thing up to the last, when the complete energy as UV photons is dumped, and that is this much zone is known as radiative zone. And that energy which is dumped by UV photons, that energy is not sufficient now that it can travel as a photon. Rather, now that heat which is produced over there, that heat has to go up through the convection process. And so the whole this much zone is known as convection zone. So during this, by the convective cells, it goes the whole energy outside. And that energy comes to the photosphere. Now what happens during this process, even you can see in this picture that here is the North Pole, here is the South Pole. The sun basically is also a bar magnet. However, poloidal field, that is north and south, is not very strong, but the magnetic flux which is generated all along is also actually going to the outer and outer atmospheres, say from convection zone to the photosphere and even chromosphere and corona, through the magnetic field lines. How it is? Through this north and south, and that is known as poloidal magnetic field lines. Now this poloidal magnetic field lines, in this magnetic flux is going out. How? Through the convection motion, that is magnetoconvection motion, and all that magnetic flux goes through the convection to the poles. So it means north and south poles have enough now significant magnetic field. But what happens, which is different from in the sun, what happens which is different from the other planets or solid bodies like Earth? Earth has a solid, as a solid body, has a rotation of 24 hours. But sun doesn't do like that. Rather, sun exhibits differential rotation. What do I mean by differential rotation? The sun actually rotates at its equator, that is here at the zero equator line, in 25 days. And as we go up and up on the latitude, then the sun moves slowly and slowly. That is around 60 degree, it will move around 30 days. And around 90 degree latitude, it will be around 36, 37 days. So the sun is not moving or rotating as a solid body, rather because it is a hot gaseous body, it moves very differently at different latitudes. Now, as I told, the two mechanisms, one, it has the north and south, that polar magnetic field, and in this polar magnetic field, magnetic flux is moving through the convective motions. Now this is going all the way even up to higher, but this, due to the second part, that differential rotation, these magnetic field lines are twisted. That is, these are the local magnetic field lines. You can see that this thing. But once this whole north to south, if it is twisted, then what will happen? That twisted magnetic field lines, they will be tortured and they will split up. So those are known as toroidal magnetic field lines or toroidal fields. So from poloidal fields, so finally the magnetic field is split up into the toroidal fields and it appears like a dark sunspots or dark spots, which we call as a sunspots. So basically the sunspots are strong magnetic fields. Why? Because that whole twisted magnetic flux which was split up, and so these spots have high magnetic flux. Now when they are split up, broken, then they have many number of dark markings or sunspots, which if we see in a group, then some will show the north polarity, that is local north polarity, local south polarity, or the positive or negative polarity. So generally sunspot appears in the group and they have both kind of polarities, north and south. And at local scale, as you can see here, and if I project it outside, then they appear connected by a magnetic field line. So now I am talking two things. One, the general whole as a sun, north-south, which is poloidal magnetic field, and at local scale on the surface, the sunspots also are connected, the opposite polarities are connected by local magnetic field lines or loops. So when this thing happens and these sunspots, you see, they appear sometimes very large in number, sometimes very low. So it has been observed since last so many years that sunspots vary with some kind of a 11-year sunspot cycle. The sunspots, particular year when the sunspots are at very minimum, very low, that year is known as sunspot minimum year. On the other hand, the year when the sunspots are largest of a given cycle, like this here, that is known as, or like here, that year is known as sunspot maximum year. So difference between the two sunspot maximum year, this and this, so that is almost between 10 to 12 years, or generally as on average it is 11 years. So that is known as 11-year sunspot cycle. Now if we see on the sun or surface of the sun this sunspots, then it will appear like this. So say for example, this is positive polarity, that is north polarity, and this is south polarity, negative polarity. So they are connected by lines of force or magnetic flux tubes, you can say, lines of force or the loops, etc. And if you see the sun as a whole, then it will rotate like this, that is from west to east. And the sunspots, which local sunspot, they will move now as the sun rotates, they will move from east to west. At the same time, as a local motion, also you can see, that is this sunspot group over here, this is north and south. So this will also move around its own axis, which is known as proper motion of the sunspot. Now this local motion of that also gives the twist in the flux tubes, that is magnetic field lines. Now what happens? Various kinds of mechanisms are possible, and as a consequence, what happens that this magnetic field energy, which is stored up in these magnetic field lines or loops, that explodes outside, and this is known as solar flare. So if we see that explosion on the sun, let us see first on the limb, that is edge of the sun, then it will appear like this big bright loops. And you can just estimate the size of this flare loops. Here I have shown for comparison the small spot which is the size of the earth. And now you can, in comparison to that, you can imagine what is the size of a big solar flare. It's not millions times, several million times of that. And even the energy which is released in this solar flare is equivalent to many trillions of atomic bombs. So you can imagine the energy which is released from the sun on the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, if I see this solar flare, that is, these are the foot points here and millions of loops are there. Now, if I arrange them on the surface, then it will appear like these two ribbon flares. So this is the 1 foot point this side, and the second is this side. And these loops, that these two ribbons also are actually, you can see the connecting these ribbons from the opposite side. So what is between these two ribbons? What is really and how this flare actually took place? Or we can ask, what is the process of this occurrence or such evolution of a big energy? You can see here in this disk, there is a sunspot over here, there is a sunspot over here, and between the two opposite polarity sunspot, there is a dark marking. Or you can see, I have given example over here, this dark marking or dark line that is known as filament. So basically, filament is a neutral line between the two opposite polarities where the maximum energy is stored over there. Now, what may happen? How this energy, that filament erupts or it gives rise to flare. So there may be various kinds of process. For example, this is the filament, okay, that dark line which I told, and this is positive, means north polarity, and on the other side it has a negative, that is south polarity. Now, in the close or in the vicinity of this main pre-existing active region, there may be a small appearance of a small another emerging flux, which also has a negative and positive polarity. Now, if it has a positive polarity close to this main negative polarity, then what will happen? This will go near and near because opposite polarities are there, and it will exert some pressure, more and more pressure. Means these lines of force local over here, they will put pressure on this main pre-existing line of force. So this will come under pressure. So it will increase the tension in the main loops. And so this filament will start to rise from the surface. And it will slowly, it will go into the corona and it will break the loops at the top. And that is known as the opening of the loops. And then loops cannot remain open for a long, even fraction of second, and they have to get reconnected. And that process is known as the reconnection, which I will discuss in few moments. But if emerging flux region is of opposite polarity, that is negative side is facing to the negative side, then there will be no eruption. Rather, the filament will not come under any tension. So this process, if I explain in terms of a sketch of the loops, then it will be like this. So this is this kind of scenario, real observation. This is a small loop, and this is the big loop over here. This is the big loop, this is small loop. So the loop-loop interaction we talk, and why we do that? Because that filament comes under pressure, and so the whole surface tension will enhance and the filament will go up. And what will happen when this pre-existing loop will interact with these small loops? So the reconnection will be here, and at this location acceleration will start, and some material will go outside, some material will come down. And how it happens will let us understand by some another mechanism also, how the process of this flare takes place. So here the one big loop is there of the another one active region. Here there is one another active region. Now what happens? That one process which I told is the occurrence of emerging flux region, which may cause the flare through the loop-loop interaction. There is yet another big process where the flare, as well as the what we call eruption of big energy as a coronal mass ejection, also may take place. I told in the beginning that the sunspot region also rotate around its own axis, and it depends that what is its tilt angle along the equator. If that is the tilt is very high, then it will have more and more shear. So what I have shown here, then that when this rotation is very strong and very high, the flux tubes or magnetic field lines will be twisted. And in the twist itself, the much energy is stored up. Now at that time when the twist is very high, also actually the filament which is lying over here, that will come under pressure and it has to lift it up. So slowly it will go up, and it finally, this small loops will be under tension, and the loop opening will be there, which finally will be reconnected, and the filament material, that big energy source, goes out, and lot of plasma goes outside. At the same time, when the reconnection takes place, the coronal material gets in all along the loop, and that is also at the same high speed, and during that process the electrons are accelerated in this magnetic field lines, and mostly non-thermal acceleration takes place. This first they come at the loop top over here, that very high energy electrons, and they interact with the ambient material, just like I have shown in this picture. So what happens, those after the reconnection, very high energetic electrons come over here, and they, in the beginning, they collide with the ambient plasma over here, and they produce the soft X-rays. That is through the whatever the temperature over here is there, and the electrons produce soft X-rays, and that is some kind of a pre-flare signature. We can observe also it, and I will demonstrate you that how our SOX instrument has observed that. But then this, under the influence of strong magnetic field lines or the magnetic field, the electrons are accelerated, and they go with the gyration very fast, with the almost with the 1/3 to almost of the velocity of light. They go and travel, and they hit to the chromosphere, where they produce and dump their whole energy and produce the H-alpha flare. In fact, what happens, the millions of electrons or billions of electrons, they collide over here, and because they are non-thermal, so when they produce over here, they interact over here, collide, the magnetic field is also very high, so they produce the non-thermal hard X-rays and the bright ribbons which we can see. At that time, the microwave emission as well as UV emission also we can see. But the important phenomena takes place here, and I would like to tell you, to the graduate students, that when these high energy electrons dump their energy over here, then they heat this chromosphere at very high temperature. The generally temperature of chromosphere is about 10,000 degree Kelvin, but due to this collision and excess heat, the temperature goes almost to 1 lakh degree, and the chromospheric material is really evaporated, and that process is known as chromospheric evaporation. And due to this high temperature, the chromosphere which is heated up, so the evaporation, the chromospheric material goes up into the lower corona, that is towards the transition zone and the lower corona, and this also produces very high temperature hard X-rays, which we call as a super hot component of the X-ray emission. So hard X-rays may be of thermal nature as well as non-thermal nature, but most non-thermal nature are here at the foot points, and thermal a little bit up into the lower corona, starting from chromosphere. And sometimes it has been observed, friends, you may like to know that the fast electrons, they may go all the way up to the photosphere and interact with the photosphere and heat its temperature to very high. That is known as the white light flare. So sometimes when the flares, that is electrons, are very strong and very high velocity, then they are able to produce the white light flare also. Now, if I want to see this, that how intense a flare, if we see as a function of time, that is we call as a light curve or intensity curve, then how it looks and how we can see the different phases of a flare. Here x-axis is the time, y-axis is the intensity of the flare. Now this flare was observed by the silicon detector of the SOX mission, which I am going to tell you in next few minutes. And here I have shown the two different curves. This first curve, the black line, is actually in 4 to 15 keV, and then next is clearly see over here, and that is the start beginning of that, which I told that immediately after the reconnection, the electrons, when they hit or they collide with the ambient plasma at the top, then the real signature of the flare start, and this is the pre-flare signature. Then next is really impulsive or explosive phase start of the flare. Then the intensity goes very significantly high in a very few first few minutes, and you can see that one peak over here, the second peak is here, then there is a third peak also is there, and then finally the gradual phase that slows down. So these different peaks refer to the different kind of radiation processes which take place in the flare. Sometimes we see the thermal peak, the super hot component also, and overall in this whole continuum process, the non-thermal emission also is there. And how we can judge from this light curve with the images I have shown over here, that you can see that in this first picture, which is from the RESI mission in 6 to 12 keV, and here you can see this one bright spot, and that is the top of the loop, and that is this thing. But here at the high energy, that is 25 to 50 keV, you can see very clearly the two bright separate points. They are the foot points, and they are the actually non-thermal hard X-ray emission regions. So if I am asked now, this is how the flare looks as a function of time, the different its phases. But if I want to see that how it looks on the energy scale, then really let us see that how we have modeled it. These are not observations, rather this is a model. And this is what I told in the very beginning during plan of my talk, that what are the key issues currently which are going on. So in those days, there were two different hot topics which I will tell you. Now in this model, x-axis is the energy, y-axis is the intensity, which we call as a spectrum. Now if you see here, the different color codes are there. So this is the pre-flare background where I have imagined that generally sun is almost 4 million K hot. That corona is always hot 4 to 5 million K. And emission measure is a quantity of the X-ray emission in a given volume, and that is depends on the how many number of electrons are there. So Ne square, electron density square into B, is the emission measure. So considering these two plasma codes, that emission measure and temperature, the pre-flare background I have developed over here. Now I would like to have your attention that up to this 3.8 or 4 keV, we can see the lines, the X-ray line emissions, but we cannot see the line emission or even the plasma any kind of X-ray emission above 4 keV significantly. On the contrary, as soon as I give the temperature T equal to 13 million K and emission measure of 10 to the 49.5, that this is a red line, and you can just see the two, that is the flare actually. I have produced a flare, and you can see in this red line, the two additional lines are visible over here. And those lines are from the iron line, that is the K beta, and iron nickel line emission. So these two features, the iron actually, the line actually comes at 6.7 keV, and the iron nickel line shoots up at around 7.8 to 7.9 keV. Now the difference between these two lines is hardly 1.2 keV. So these two lines, the first result which we see is that these lines appear only and only when the flare is there. Without flare, these lines do not appear. And if we want to observe these two lines, then we should have a system or a detector should be good enough having the resolution, energy resolution less than 1 keV, then only we can resolve these two lines. So this was a key issue to prove that yes, these two lines are there. The second part, you can see when I give the very high temperature, 40 million degree K, and emission measure of 10 to the 47. That is this green line. But as soon as I give very high temperature, yes, the lines are still there. But the emissivity comes down. And finally, as I told that there are many electrons of very high energy, very high velocity, and they do not follow the Maxwellian, that is the thermal emission, rather they follow the non-thermal or non-Maxwellian distribution, that is power law. And that is power law, that line, blue line I have shown by here, that is the non-thermal emission. So if I combine this, that is the black line, and in this black total emission, you can see that these two lines are visible when the flare is there. Second thing, this thermal emission, that is the soft X-ray, which, and then there is a non-thermal. So in the continuum part, we do not know at what energy the soft X-ray ends and at what energy hard X-ray, that non-thermal, begins. So that to measure the break energy point between the soft X-ray and hard X-ray, this was also a major issue that in the solar physics science. And so with these two aims, that is to observe and measure this X-ray lines, that is iron and nickel lines, and to measure this break energy point. With these two aims, with these two key issues, we designed and developed an instrument known as Solar X-ray Spectrometer at PRL Physical Research Laboratory, at Space Application Center and ISRO Satellite Center. And then we finally completed the whole project during the interval of 1998 to 2003, and then it was sent to for various kinds of tests at the ISRO Satellite Center. Here is a small brief picture. This small collimator tube of this detector package, this is basically at the base of that is silicon detector, and at the longer tube, that is cadmium zinc telluride detector. Silicon is sensitive to 4 to 25 keV, and cadmium zinc telluride is sensitive to 4 to 56 keV. Both are basically semiconductor devices, photodiodes, and they are very, very sensitive to when the electron falls, they give very good, electrons and holes they produce. So these were chosen, and they also have very good high energy resolution, less than 1 keV. So so as to aim to detect those two lines separately. Well, this whole detector package was mounted on a sun tracking mechanism, so as that sun always actually is in the center of this collimator tube, and it can see. So with this sun tracking mechanism, we were able to observe every day the 3 to 4 hours, because the rest of the time were given to other instruments. Now, very briefly, I will tell you the electronics system, although I don't want to go into the detail, but this is a silicon line, this is the CZT line. As you can see here, when the X-ray photon falls over here on the silicon detector, then it produces the electrons and this holes over there, and then electrons are taken through the pre-amplifier signal to the front-end electronics, so as to make the pulse height analyzer to identify the photon was of which energy. We also take from this to some counters to identify the flare or flare triggering mechanism. Similarly in CZT. So finally, the whole pulse height analyzer signals we were taking to the processing electronics, and we were making the spectrum. The voltages to the detectors, to the front-end electronics, pulse height analyzer were being given through the common electronics, and then the whole system from the master control facility at Hassan we was being controlled through the telemetry, and the data was being sent through the telecommand over here to the physical research laboratory via Hassan East. The whole, I mean payload, I should say, solar X-ray spectrometer payload was successfully tested at ISAC, Bangalore, and then it was sent to the Sriharikota so as to finally test and calibrate at on the spacecraft and on the launch pad, and then it was launched on 8 May 2003. And successful observations we started from 8 June, just after 1 month, 8 June 2003. From them, from then, we have observed more than 500 flares during 8 years successful period of observation. Now, I would like to show the capability of that high resolution silicon detector. You can see on this intensity plot, x-axis is the time, y-axis is the intensity of the, and you can see the very tiny small flare which we call on the Gauss scale as A flare and B flare, and then C flare and M class flares like that. So all kinds of flares were the detector was able to observe, and without even saturation. That was the main beauty, and both the detectors actually worked very well and produced the very nice observations. And many observations could allow us to observe, as I show here, this iron and nickel lines. So this x-axis here, this is the spectrum energy, y-axis is the intensity, and you can see here in the plot, this iron line at almost 6.7 keV, very clearly, unambiguously, explicitly visible, and the small bump over here around 7.8, 7.9 keV, this iron nickel line is also visible. This flare was observed on 25 August 2005, and you can see that every spectrum at different time intervals reveal very clearly this, and this we observed, and this was informed through the astronomical telegram that PRL has instrument. This has observed clear-cut iron and nickel line, and we have published many papers, almost more than 20 papers from out of these SOX observation, and even 4 PhDs have come out from this. Now I would like to tell the other thing, how the temperature is influencing on the various kind of X-ray line emission as well as continuum emission. Here this is the definition of equivalent width. It is the above the continuum, how much line emission is there. This is defined by the I line minus IC divided by IC, and integrated over the 5.8 to 7.5 kV for iron line. Now this x-axis is the temperature, y-axis is this equivalent width. You can see that as a function of increasing temperature, this equivalent width comes down. Means the emission, X-ray emission above 40 keV. So we did this analysis for more than almost 30 flares, and finally what we found that combining all the observations as a function of temperature, the above 40 million K temperature, the emission or equivalent width comes down, means it starts to settle down over there. So it means the temperature in the flare plasma is very important to reveal the various kinds of mechanisms. The other issue which I told that with the SOX was to a measurement of the break energy point. And this break energy point, that is the energy point between the soft X-ray and hard X-ray. So to whether we can really quantitatively can tell that this soft X-ray ends over here and from here the hard X-ray begins. There are various kinds of methods to do that, and I do not want to give you big mathematics over here or to introduce the various equations, etc., of radiative and conductive cooling and all this. But what I'm planning to give you a very simple technique also, which we used to measure and distinguish the soft X-ray component and hard X-ray component. Here what in this picture, x-axis is time and y-axis is intensity. That is, these are the light curves. However, at different energies, let us say 4 to 5 keV, this top curve, then 5 to 6 keV, 6 to 7 keV, like that, at different energy levels. So different colors actually refer, you can read also. And finally, last is about the 20 to 25 keV. And now what I want to show here, that if you see the flare in the first curve, that is in soft X-ray 4 to 5 keV, the flare begins over somewhere here, but it peaks to somewhere here. Okay, and similarly, if you go higher and higher energy, then you will see that the beginning of the flare was delayed by few seconds, but the peak is little earlier to this first peak. And if we see over at the last highest energy, then the beginning of the flare is quite significantly late by a minute or so, and then the peak is at very fast. This shows that the rise time, that is, rise time means peak time minus begin time, that is the onset or start time. So rise time is very high in soft X-ray emission relative to the rise time in hard X-ray. And this enables that where that measurement, of this delay time enables us to say that finally around 17 and 20 keV, the hard X-ray begins. And this was the very important discovery by this instrument. The another very important discovery was, and which is very highly recognized, that the flare plasma is of multithermal in nature. That flare is so big in area and volume that we cannot consider that flare is of isothermal in nature, which previously was being considered in earlier calculation, but our instrument actually gave an idea that the one temperature, it does not exist in the flare, and thereby we concluded that emission measure cannot be of one single volume and emissivity, rather it is a differential emission measure, and as a consequence in the whole flare plasma we should conclude or measure the different temperatures. So with this I would like to conclude my talk. As we have seen that the X-ray emission is of two types. One is the line emission, continuum emission, and continuum is again further we can split up into two: thermal Bremester-Long continuum emission and non-thermal Bremester-Long continuum emission. The solar flares actually occur as a consequence of reconnection of magnetic field lines, and this reconnection may take place by different processes, which I told there's due to the filament eruption under the pressure of emerging flux, or it may erupt due to the flux tubes twist and tension produced over there, and this produces a flare, the large amount of radiation covering almost the whole electromagnetic spectrum, though it depends what is its magnitude of the flare. The SOX actually has a very clear-cut made a discovery of iron and iron nickel line features with clear-cut measurement of equivalent width of iron and nickel lines. We measured its peak energy and flux also, and we measured as a function of temperature how it varies. SOX actually also observations proven that flare plasma is of multithermal in nature. This was a big discovery. And then between this emission energy of 4 to 20 keV, we measured that the temperatures are of various natures, which are, as I told, 15 to 30 million K, and with 17 keV, around that is the break energy point, which we could measure in many flares. And finally, with all these kinds of new observation, still data is in the analysis process, and two students are doing PhD employing this SOX data. So if anybody wants to have questions or want to see our papers, you can send email on these two email IDs and request for the publications. Thank you very much to you, all of you, as well. I say thank you very much to Professor Hariom Vats, who gave me an opportunity to discuss and share our knowledge with all of you. The Space Education Research Foundation really deserves a sincere thanks from me. Thank you very much.